Long before written history, before cities, kings, or even memory itself, something happened on this planet that should not have been possible. Entire worlds rose, mastered their environment, and vanished so completely that their existence now feels like a myth whispered through stone. Why do ancient structures defy modern engineering? Why do myths from every corner of the earth describe the same floods, the same fires from the sky, the same forgotten golden age? Why do traces of advanced knowledge appear where no civilization should have existed? And why does the past seem to be trying so desperately to remind us of something we have chosen to forget? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. The ground beneath our feet is not the beginning of history. It is the aftermath. Beneath every city, every mountain, every quiet stretch of land lies the residue of worlds that lived, thrived, and collapsed long before our earliest recorded memory. The earth does not preserve its past politely. It erases it, compresses it, melts it, and recycles it until only fragments remain. Fragments that modern civilization mistakes for anomalies instead of warnings. What we call prehistory is not an empty void of ignorance. It is a graveyard of civilizations erased by forces far older and more powerful than humanity's sense of permanence. Human history, as taught, begins timidly. Hunter-gatherers wandering aimlessly until one day they discover agriculture, then writing, then cities, and finally progress. It is a comforting story because it suggests a steady climb toward enlightenment. But the physical evidence buried in stone tells a far more violent and discontinuous story, one where intelligence appears, vanishes, and reappears again like a recurring echo across geological time. A story not of linear ascent, but of collapse and rebirth. Consider how fragile our own civilization truly is. Remove electricity, and within weeks, supply chains fail. Within months, cities empty. Within a generation, knowledge decays into myth. Now stretch that vulnerability across thousands of years and add planetary catastrophes, ice ages, asteroid impacts, magnetic field collapses. What survives is not the truth, but the fragments resilient enough to endure. Stone, myth, and silence. Across the globe, ancient structures rise from landscapes where they should not exist. Stone circles aligned to stars, massive blocks cut with precision beyond what bronze tools could achieve, monuments constructed with an understanding of geometry and astronomy that rivals modern engineering. These are not the works of primitive societies taking their first steps. They are the fingerprints of cultures that already knew, that remembered something lost to us. The official narrative insists these structures were built by simple people using crude tools over vast spans of time. But the evidence often refuses to cooperate. Stones weighing tens or hundreds of tons fit together so precisely that even a blade cannot pass between them. Alignments track celestial cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. Materials appear in places where they could not have been quarried or transported with known ancient technology. These are not isolated anomalies. They appear on every continent, as if a single forgotten intelligence once touched the entire planet. The deeper we look, the more the timeline fractures. Geological layers tell one story, while artifacts tell another. Objects embedded in strata millions of years old challenge the assumption that complex technology is recent. Tools appear where no humans should have existed. Traces of metallurgy surface in eras officially dominated by stone. Each discovery is quietly labeled an error, a hoax, or an outlier, because accepting them would require rewriting the entire human story. Yet the Earth does not lie. It simply records, and its memory is long. Civilizations, like organisms, leave behind fossils. But not all fossils are bones. Some are patterns carved into landscapes, others are myths repeated across cultures that never met. Flood stories emerge independently on every continent, describing a world-ending deluge that reset civilization. Fire from the sky, days of darkness, seas swallowing cities. These are not poetic coincidences. They are collective memories encoded into narrative so they could survive the collapse of language itself. If catastrophe erased civilization before, it would explain the sudden leaps and inexplicable gaps in human development. It would explain why advanced knowledge appears suddenly, fully formed, without the long experimental phase we expect. It would explain why humanity seems haunted by a sense of déjà vu, why our myths warn us of cycles, of endings, of reckoning. The planet itself bears the scars of such resets. Meltwater pulses, sudden climate reversals, and extinction events appear again and again in geological records. Ice cores show abrupt temperature swings that happened not over millennia, but within decades. Entire ecosystems vanished almost overnight. These were not gradual changes. They were catastrophes, and every catastrophe leaves survivors. Those survivors would have faced a shattered world, coastlines drowned, skies choked with ash, familiar lands erased. Knowledge would have become survival lore. Technology would have been remembered only in fragments. Over generations, memory would fade into myth. The gods would become the ancestors. The machines would become magic. And the truth would be buried beneath allegory. What if the ancient stories were never meant to be taken literally, but neither were they meant to be dismissed? What if they were encoded warnings, compressed histories, designed to outlive the collapse of civilization itself? When writing fails, story remains. When monuments crumble, myths endure. Every civilization believes it stands at the pinnacle of history. Every civilization is wrong. The uncomfortable possibility is that we are not the first to master the planet, only the latest to forget what came before. And if the patterns hold, forgetting may be the most dangerous phase of all. The ruins beneath our feet are not relics of primitive ancestors. They are echoes of predecessors who may have known the same ambitions, made the same mistakes, and trusted that their world would last forever. The silence they left behind is not emptiness. It is a warning waiting to be understood. And now, once again, the signs are aligning. The climate shifts, the magnetic field weakens, the myths resurface in popular culture. The old questions return, uninvited. Who were we before history began? And how many times have we already fallen? The answers are not buried in the future. They are beneath us, waiting patiently, as they always have, for someone to finally listen. The deeper the past is examined, the more unstable the official timeline becomes. Beneath the surface of accepted history lies a pattern that repeats with unsettling consistency. Civilizations do not rise slowly from ignorance toward enlightenment. They appear suddenly, already complex, already structured, and then they vanish just as abruptly. This pattern is not random. It follows a rhythm shaped by forces far greater than human ambition. Each cycle leaves behind fragments that do not belong to the age in which they are found, fragments that whisper of forgotten knowledge and erased worlds. Across continents, the earliest known settlements reveal an uncomfortable truth. They do not represent humanity's first attempts at organization, but rather the remnants of something inherited. Agriculture appears abruptly, without a clear evolutionary buildup. Mathematics, astronomy, and architecture emerge already refined. There is no long trail of trial and error. Instead, there is a leap, as if knowledge were recovered rather than invented. This phenomenon suggests continuity rather than origin, recovery rather than discovery. The stone structures scattered across the planet reinforce this idea. From massive platforms carved with mathematical precision to cities aligned perfectly with celestial cycles, these constructions speak of a shared understanding of the cosmos. The builders possessed not only technical skill, but also a conceptual framework that linked earth, sky, and time. These were not isolated achievements of isolated tribes. They reflect a unified way of thinking that transcended geography and culture. What modern observers often miss is the sophistication hidden in simplicity. A stone block shaped with microscopic precision does not announce its complexity loudly. It sits in silence, defying erosion and expectation. Yet the accuracy of its angles, the resonance of its placement, and its alignment with solar or stellar events reveal a mastery that modern tools struggle to replicate. Such achievements imply the existence of a lost science, one not based on brute force, but on understanding of natural harmonics. This knowledge did not disappear all at once. It fragmented. As environments changed and populations scattered, pieces of understanding survived in ritual, myth, and architecture. Over time, these fragments were misunderstood, simplified, and ritualized. What was once functional became symbolic. What once powered structures became ceremonial gestures. The meaning faded, but the form endured. Civilizations that followed inherited these remnants without grasping their original purpose. They built temples atop older foundations, repurposed sacred sites, and told stories whose origins they no longer remembered. Each generation stood on the shoulders of a forgotten one, mistaking inheritance for innovation. The deeper truth remained buried beneath layers of reinterpretation. Natural disasters played a critical role in this amnesia. Floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and climatic shifts repeatedly erased population centers. Entire cultures vanished, leaving only scattered survivors. These survivors carried fragments of knowledge, often distorted by trauma and time. Over generations, technical understanding transformed into mythology. Tools became talismans, science became story. The planet itself acted as an archivist of catastrophe. Ice cores recorded abrupt climate shifts. Sediment layers preserved evidence of sudden flooding and widespread fire. Extinction events marked the timeline with brutal clarity. Each reset stripped humanity back to its most basic state, forcing survivors to rebuild from fragments. The pattern repeated so consistently that it suggests an underlying mechanism rather than coincidence. As centuries passed, the survivors adapted to a harsher world. They learned to live smaller, to depend less on grand systems and more on localized knowledge. The memory of a global civilization faded, replaced by regional cultures with limited reach, yet echoes remained in shared symbols, in architectural motifs, in myths that spoke of golden ages and fallen heavens. These myths were not fantasies born of ignorance. They were compressed histories encoded for survival. Storytelling became a method of data preservation. Through metaphor and allegory, essential knowledge endured. Flood myths preserved the memory of rising seas. Fire myths preserved the terror of cosmic impacts. Creation stories recorded the rebuilding of society after collapse. What appears to be imagination was, in fact, memory adapted for endurance. As time passed, humanity grew confident again. Cities expanded. Empires rose. Writing returned, followed by philosophy, science, and law. Yet even at the height of these civilizations, traces of the older world persisted like ghosts. Monuments older than recorded history stood untouched. Sacred sites remained venerated despite their forgotten origins. Humanity built upon foundations it no longer understood. This pattern reveals a sobering truth. Progress is not guaranteed. Knowledge is not permanent. Civilization is not a straight line ascending toward perfection. It is a cycle of ascent, collapse, and rediscovery. Each cycle forgets the lessons of the one before, convinced of its own uniqueness, blind to the warnings etched into stone. The present age is no exception. Surrounded by advanced technology, humanity believes itself immune to the failures of the past. Yet the same vulnerabilities remain. Climate instability, resource depletion, and social fragmentation echo the conditions that preceded previous collapses. The difference now lies only in scale. The reach is global. The consequences are planetary. What remains is a choice between remembrance and repetition. The evidence left behind by prior civilizations is not meant to inspire awe alone. It is a message encoded in ruins and myths, urging awareness. The past does not whisper gently. It speaks in broken monuments and silent ruins, waiting for those willing to listen. The truth embedded in stone and story is simple and unforgiving. Civilization is not guaranteed. It must be understood, protected, and remembered. Otherwise, the cycle will continue, and future minds will walk upon the ruins of this world, wondering who we were and why we vanished. As the layers of forgotten time accumulate, a deeper pattern begins to emerge, one that cannot be dismissed as coincidence or coincidence alone. Beneath every civilization's rise lies an inherited foundation shaped by forces older than language itself. The stones, the myths, the ruins, and the silent geometries etched into the earth form a continuous record of adaptation and loss. Humanity did not begin in darkness and stumble into light. It inherited fragments of a broken brilliance and struggled to understand their meaning. The physical world preserves memory in ways human minds cannot. Mountains remember pressure. Ice remembers catastrophe. Stone remembers design. Across continents, ancient constructions reveal a shared logic that transcends cultural boundaries. The same ratios, the same alignments, the same harmonic proportions appear in places that had no contact by conventional historical accounts. This uniformity implies inheritance, not coincidence. Knowledge traveled not merely through migration, but through continuity, passed down, fragmented, and reassembled across generations. Ancient builders displayed an intimate understanding of geometry that far exceeded practical necessity. They shaped massive stones to align with solstices, equinoxes, and celestial cycles that required long-term observation far beyond a single lifetime. Such precision suggests not improvisation, but inheritance of data collected over millennia. These structures were not experiments. They were refinements. They represent the continuation of an older science refined over vast spans of time. This continuity becomes more evident when examining the way ancient cultures understood time itself. Time was not linear. It was cyclical, rhythmic, returning upon itself. Calendars carved into stone recorded not just days or seasons, but cosmic rhythms governing the movement of stars and the precession of the Earth's axis. These were not symbolic flourishes. They were tools for survival in a world prone to periodic catastrophe. The ancients understood that the sky was not static. They watched it change, marking patterns that repeated across thousands of years. They tracked celestial cycles not out of curiosity, but necessity. These cycles determined when the world would shift, when floods would rise, when ice would retreat, and when fire would fall from the heavens. Knowledge of the heavens was knowledge of survival. This awareness shaped their architecture. Temples were not simply places of worship, but instruments designed to interact with celestial forces. Their alignments were deliberate, their geometry functional. Many of these structures resonate acoustically in ways that affect human consciousness, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of sound, vibration, and perception. The ancients did not separate science from spirituality. To them, they were the same language spoken in different dialects. As millennia passed, the original meanings faded. The mechanisms were preserved but misunderstood. Ritual replaced function. Symbol replaced science. The rituals remained because they worked in ways people could feel, even if they no longer knew why. This is how technology becomes mythology. The tool survives, but its purpose is forgotten. Civilizations rose atop these remnants, believing themselves the first to understand the world. Yet every time, the same vulnerability returned. Climate shifts, resource depletion, and geological upheavals erased progress with indifference. The planet does not negotiate, it resets. And with each reset, humanity is reduced to fragments, forced to rebuild from what little remains. These resets were not evenly spaced. They came in waves, driven by cosmic and terrestrial forces beyond human control. Changes in solar activity, shifts in the planet's magnetic field, impacts from celestial debris, and massive volcanic eruptions combined to reshape the world repeatedly. Each cycle left scars etched into rock and memory alike. The survivors of these events became the ancestors of new civilizations. Their stories carried echoes of catastrophe, floods, fires, darkened skies, and wandering stars. Over generations, these memories transformed into myth, but the core remained intact. The consistency of these myths across continents is not coincidence, it is testimony. Humanity's relationship with its own past is therefore deeply fractured. We inherit the artifacts of previous ages without understanding the context that created them. We marvel at their complexity while dismissing their implications. The possibility that earlier civilizations achieved technological or organizational feats comparable to, or exceeding, our own challenges the comforting narrative of linear progress. This discomfort fuels denial. It is easier to believe that all progress is recent than to accept that knowledge can be lost. Modern culture prides itself on advancement, yet it often ignores the fragility of its foundations. Electricity, global communication, and industrial production depend on systems that can collapse swiftly. When they do, the memory of how they worked will fade faster than we expect. What remains after collapse is not innovation, but adaptation. People revert to what works with minimal resources. Oral tradition replaces written records. Stone replaces steel. Memory replaces data. Over generations, what was once advanced becomes mythic. The survivors do not remember the machines. They remember the stories. These stories become the seeds of the next civilization. They inspire, warn, and guide, even when stripped of context. The myths of sky gods, world floods, and golden ages are not fantasies born of ignorance. They are echoes of real events processed through human perception and preserved through narrative necessity. Understanding this reframes the past. The question is no longer whether ancient civilizations were advanced, but how many times advanced civilizations have risen and fallen. The evidence suggests a pattern of recurrence, not progression. Humanity is not marching forward, it is orbiting its own history. Each cycle erases much of what came before, but never completely. Something always remains, buried, distorted, waiting. The task of the present age is not to conquer nature, but to listen to it, to read the warnings etched into stone and encoded in myth, to recognize that survival depends not on dominance, but on harmony with forces far greater than ourselves. The story of humanity is not a straight ascent from darkness into light. It is a spiral, returning again and again to familiar points under different names. We have been here before. The ruins beneath our feet are proof. The question is not whether another collapse will come, but whether this time awareness will change the outcome. If history is a cycle, then memory is the only escape. The future depends not on technological advancement alone, but on understanding the lessons carved into the bones of the earth. The past is not behind us. It surrounds us, waiting to be remembered. As the remnants of forgotten civilizations surface through stone and soil, a deeper realization emerges. Humanity has never truly started from zero. Each era inherits more than it realizes, carrying forward fragments of knowledge embedded not in books or machines, but in instinct, symbol, and subconscious memory. Beneath the visible ruins lies a subtler inheritance, one encoded into patterns of thought, ritual, and belief that persist long after the original meaning has been lost. This inheritance reveals itself most clearly in the way ancient cultures understood their relationship with the natural world. They did not see nature as something separate or hostile, but as an intelligent system with which humanity was in constant negotiation. Mountains were not obstacles, they were anchors. Rivers were not obstacles, they were arteries. The sky was not empty. It was a map, a clock, and a warning system. This worldview was not philosophical speculation. It was practical knowledge developed through survival in a volatile world. Evidence of this worldview appears in the astonishing consistency of ancient cosmologies. Civilizations separated by oceans described remarkably similar structures of the universe: layered worlds, cyclical time, and recurring ages of destruction and renewal. These were not poetic coincidences. They were attempts to describe observed patterns using the symbolic language available at the time. When knowledge could not be written in equations, it was encoded in stories. This encoded knowledge often centered around cycles of catastrophe. Floods, fires, darkness, and celestial upheaval appear again and again across cultures. These were not metaphors for moral decay or divine punishment. They were records of environmental trauma preserved in narrative form. The persistence of these themes suggests that such events were not rare anomalies, but recurring features of Earth's history. The geological record supports this interpretation. Layers of sediment reveal abrupt transitions that cannot be explained by slow, gradual change. Ice cores show sudden temperature spikes and drops. Fossil records display mass extinctions occurring in brief intervals. These events did not unfold over millions of years, but over generations, sometimes even decades. For those living through them, the world would have ended. In the aftermath of such catastrophes, survivors faced a transformed landscape. Coastlines vanished, ecosystems collapsed, familiar landmarks disappeared beneath water or ash. The survivors had to adapt quickly or perish. In such conditions, the preservation of knowledge became secondary to survival. Tools simplified, societies decentralized. Oral tradition replaced written record. What remained of previous knowledge was reshaped to fit new realities. Yet even as technical knowledge faded, the memory of lost greatness lingered. Myths of golden ages and fallen gods appeared everywhere. These stories were not nostalgic fantasies, but cultural memory compressed into narrative form. They preserved the knowledge that humanity had once achieved great heights and paid a heavy price for overreaching. Over time, these myths became moral frameworks. They warned against hubris, against angering the forces of nature, against forgetting the balance between creation and destruction. But as centuries passed, the lessons became allegorical rather than instructional. The original context dissolved, leaving behind stories that seemed symbolic rather than historical. This loss of context is one of the great tragedies of human history. When the original meaning is forgotten, repetition becomes inevitable. Without understanding the mechanisms of past collapses, societies are doomed to repeat them under new names and circumstances. Each civilization believes it is unique, immune to the failures of its predecessors. Each is proven wrong. Modern civilization is no exception. Despite unprecedented technological power, it rests on fragile foundations. Supply chains stretch across continents. Energy systems depend on constant stability. Information flows at the speed of light, yet wisdom lags behind. The illusion of control masks a profound vulnerability. The ancient world understood vulnerability intimately. Their monuments were not expressions of dominance but of humility. They acknowledged forces beyond human command and sought harmony rather than conquest. Their architecture aligned with natural cycles, not for aesthetic beauty, but for survival. Their rituals encoded warnings about imbalance, excess, and forgetfulness. As time passed, the symbolic meaning of these structures faded. Later, cultures repurposed them without understanding their function. Temples became palaces. Observatories became shrines. What once served as instruments of alignment became objects of worship. The shift from knowledge to belief marked the beginning of decline. Yet even in decay, traces of the original intent remain. Sacred sites often occupy locations of intense geological or electromagnetic activity. Ancient builders seemed to understand these energetic nodes and chose them deliberately. Modern science is only beginning to rediscover these phenomena, often dismissing ancient explanations while unknowingly confirming them through different language. The persistence of these sites across millennia suggests that their creators possessed an advanced understanding of Earth as a dynamic system. They recognized patterns invisible to the untrained eye and built accordingly. Their cities were not random accumulations, but carefully placed components of a planetary network. As time passed and civilizations collapsed, these networks fragmented. The knowledge of how to maintain them disappeared. Yet the structures remained, silent and patient, waiting to be rediscovered. Each rediscovery brings a glimpse of what was lost and a warning of what could be lost again. Modern humanity stands at a crossroads similar to those faced by its predecessors. The signs are familiar: environmental instability, social fragmentation, technological overreach. The difference lies in awareness. For the first time, we possess the tools to understand our own history beyond myth. We can read the geological record, decode ancient symbols, and compare data across disciplines. The question is whether we will choose to learn from what we uncover. Knowledge alone does not prevent collapse. Wisdom does. And wisdom requires humility, the willingness to accept that progress is not guaranteed, and that the past holds lessons essential for survival. The ruins scattered across the world are not monuments to failure. They are warnings carved in stone. They tell the story of civilizations that rose high, believed themselves secure, and vanished when they forgot the limits of their world. The same forces that shaped their fate still operate today. If humanity is to break the cycle, it must listen to these silent teachers. The stones have already spoken. The question is whether we are prepared to understand what they are saying before the next chapter is written. As the echoes of forgotten civilizations continue to surface, a pattern emerges that challenges not only history, but the very definition of progress. The remnants left behind are not random debris from a primitive world, but fragments of a system that once functioned with precision and intention. The deeper we look, the more it becomes clear that what we call advancement may in fact be a cycle of remembering and forgetting, rather than a steady march forward. One of the most revealing aspects of this lost knowledge is its apparent universality. Across continents and across millennia, ancient societies developed strikingly similar symbols, structures, and cosmologies. These parallels are too precise to be coincidence. Spirals, concentric circles, stepped pyramids, and axial alignments appear in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. Such repetition implies inheritance rather than independent invention. It suggests a shared source of knowledge passed down through time, fractured but persistent. The Earth itself appears to have been the central reference point for this knowledge. Ancient builders understood the planet not as a static mass, but as a living system. They recognized cycles in climate, magnetism, and celestial motion, and integrated this awareness into their constructions. Structures were placed at nodal points where natural energies converged, locations now known to exhibit unusual electromagnetic properties. These sites were not chosen randomly. They were selected with intention, precision, and deep understanding. This global network of sacred sites functioned as a planetary system long before the concept of globalism existed. Each site acted as a node in a larger web, amplifying and transmitting energy across great distances. The alignment of monuments across continents suggests coordination that defies conventional explanations. Such synchronization would require a shared body of knowledge and a long-term vision extending beyond individual lifetimes. The people who built these structures did not see themselves as separate from the Earth. They understood humanity as a participant in a larger living system. Their architecture reflects this worldview. Buildings were not imposed upon nature, but grown from it, shaped in harmony with geological and celestial forces. This integration stands in stark contrast to modern construction, which often seeks to dominate rather than cooperate with the environment. As time passed and conditions changed, this delicate balance was lost. Environmental shifts disrupted the systems that sustained ancient societies. Floods, droughts, and seismic events dismantled carefully maintained networks. With the collapse of these systems came the fragmentation of knowledge. What remained were isolated practices stripped of their original context. Survivors passed on fragments of understanding through ritual, art, and oral tradition. These fragments evolved into myths that encoded essential truths in symbolic form. Stories of gods descending from the sky, of worlds destroyed by fire or water, and of heroes who preserved knowledge through catastrophe appear across cultures. These narratives were not meant to be taken literally, yet they were not fictional either. They were memory compressed into metaphor. As generations passed, the original meanings faded. The myths became entertainment or moral allegory. The practical knowledge they once contained was lost, leaving only echoes. Yet, even in their altered form, these stories continued to influence human behavior, guiding societies through cycles of growth and collapse. The rediscovery of ancient sites in the modern era has begun to unravel this forgotten lineage. Archaeological findings increasingly challenge conventional timelines, revealing sophisticated engineering and planning far earlier than previously believed. Each discovery forces a reconsideration of what ancient people were capable of and how much has been forgotten. This reevaluation is uncomfortable. It undermines the narrative of continuous progress and challenges the assumption that modern civilization represents the pinnacle of human achievement. Instead, it suggests that humanity has risen and fallen multiple times, each cycle leaving behind traces that hint at lost brilliance. The implications are profound. If advanced knowledge existed in the distant past, then the current era is not unprecedented. Our technologies, while impressive, may simply be a rediscovery of principles once known and lost. This realization reframes innovation as remembrance rather than invention. The recurring theme across all ancient cultures is balance. When societies respected the limits of their environment and lived in harmony with natural cycles, they flourished. When they overreached, exploiting resources without restraint, collapse followed. This pattern is etched into the geological record and echoed in mythology. Modern civilization stands at a similar threshold. The scale of technological power now wielded far exceeds that of any previous age, yet the underlying vulnerabilities remain the same. Environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social fragmentation mirror the conditions that preceded past collapses. The difference lies only in speed and scale. The ancient warnings embedded in stone and story were never meant to frighten. They were meant to educate. They served as reminders that survival depends not on domination, but on balance. The civilizations that ignored this lesson disappeared, leaving behind ruins as silent testimony. Today, humanity faces a choice. We can continue along a path of unchecked expansion, repeating the mistakes encoded in our own history, or we can learn from the remnants left by those who came before us. The knowledge is there, waiting to be recognized. The past is not dead. It is layered beneath our feet and woven into our consciousness. Each artifact, each myth, each ruined structure carries a message across time. The challenge lies not in discovering new information, but in interpreting what has already been revealed. Understanding the true nature of our origins forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our future. If civilizations before us rose and fell despite their achievements, then progress alone offers no guarantee of survival. Only awareness, restraint, and respect for the forces that shape our world can break the cycle. The story of humanity is not one of linear advancement, but of recurring awakening. Each era is given the opportunity to learn from the last. Whether we heed those lessons determines whether we continue the cycle or finally transcend it. The echoes of the past are growing louder, and they demand to be heard. As the remnants of ancient worlds continue to surface, a more unsettling realization takes shape. The disappearance of prior civilizations was not merely the result of random catastrophe, but part of a repeating cycle governed by forces humanity still barely understands. These forces operate beyond politics, beyond culture, and beyond intention. They are embedded in the mechanics of the planet itself, shaping the rise and fall of civilizations with cold indifference. Throughout history, humanity has assumed itself to be the central actor in its own story. Yet the deeper layers of geological and archaeological evidence suggest otherwise. Human societies are not the authors of planetary change. They are participants reacting to shifts far larger than themselves. Earth's systems move according to rhythms that dwarf human timelines, and when those rhythms shift, civilizations are either reshaped or erased. Ancient builders seemed acutely aware of this reality. Their monuments were not merely expressions of power or belief, but tools for alignment, structures designed to interact with cosmic cycles. The orientation of temples toward solstices, equinoxes, and stellar risings was not symbolic decoration. It was calibration. These builders were aligning themselves with forces they recognized as inevitable and overwhelming. This understanding reveals why so many ancient structures appear obsessed with precision. The placement of stones, the angles of corridors, and the geometry of entire cities reflect an advanced awareness of astronomical and geophysical cycles. These civilizations were not guessing. They were measuring. Their architecture functioned as both record and response to the movements of the earth and sky. As climates shifted and seas rose, these civilizations faced choices that would determine their survival. Some attempted to adapt by altering their environments, constructing massive systems to regulate water and temperature. Others sought refuge in highlands or underground spaces. A few attempted to preserve knowledge in durable forms, hoping future generations might rediscover it when conditions improved. Despite their efforts, most were overwhelmed. The planet does not negotiate. When its cycles reach a tipping point, adaptation must be rapid or extinction follows. The archaeological record bears witness to this brutal efficiency. Entire cultures vanish from the record with little explanation beyond layers of sediment and silence. What remains are the faint outlines of a once complex world, foundations without cities, roads without destinations, tools without context. These fragments challenge modern assumptions about progress. They suggest that intelligence alone is not sufficient for survival. Without balance, knowledge becomes fragile. One of the most compelling aspects of this lost knowledge is its apparent global coordination. Similar architectural techniques appear across continents, often separated by vast oceans. The precision with which certain sites align to celestial events implies a shared understanding of astronomy that transcended geographic isolation. This level of coherence suggests not isolated innovation, but a networked civilization operating on a planetary scale. Such a network would have required communication systems capable of transmitting information across great distances. While no physical remnants of such systems remain, their existence is implied by the uniformity of design principles found worldwide. The medium of transmission may not have been technological in the modern sense, but cultural, symbolic, or even biological. Over time, as environmental conditions worsened, these networks fractured. Isolation replaced connectivity. Knowledge that once flowed freely became localized, distorted, and eventually mythologized. What survived were fragments, stories of gods descending from the sky, of great floods that reshaped the world, of golden ages lost to catastrophe. These stories are often dismissed as allegory, yet they align too closely across cultures to be coincidence. They describe the same sequence of events, a time of harmony, a catastrophic disruption, and a struggle to rebuild. This pattern repeats in region after region, suggesting a shared global experience rather than independent invention. As centuries passed, the descendants of survivors rebuilt with what little they retained. Over time, the memory of the catastrophe faded, replaced by legend. The practical knowledge of previous eras became sacred lore, stripped of its original function. The cycle reset. The modern era stands at a similar threshold. Technology has advanced at an unprecedented rate, but the underlying vulnerabilities remain unchanged. Climate instability, resource depletion, and social fragmentation mirror conditions that preceded earlier collapses. The difference now is scale. The impact of failure would not be regional, but planetary. Yet, unlike our predecessors, we possess the ability to recognize these patterns. We can analyze ancient data, decode geological records, and compare myths across cultures. For the first time, humanity has the opportunity to learn from its entire past, not just the recent chapters. This awareness carries responsibility. Understanding that civilization has risen and fallen before forces a re-evaluation of progress. Advancement without wisdom leads to repetition. The ruins scattered across the world are not just remnants of the past. They are warnings etched in stone. The question is no longer whether collapse can happen again, but whether it can be prevented. The answer lies not in technological supremacy, but in humility and adaptation. The ancient builders may have failed to escape the cycles of destruction, but they left behind lessons encoded in architecture, myth, and memory. By studying these remnants with humility rather than arrogance, humanity gains the opportunity to break the pattern. The past does not demand worship, only understanding. Its message is not one of doom, but of caution. Remember, adapt, and endure. If civilization is to survive the next great turning, it must learn to listen to the echoes beneath its feet. The stones have been speaking for millennia. What remains to be seen is whether we are finally ready to hear them. As the echoes of vanished civilizations continue to surface, another layer of understanding begins to reveal itself, one that shifts the focus from collapse to continuity. The ruins left behind are not merely evidence of destruction, but fragments of adaptation, records of how past societies attempted to endure forces far greater than themselves. Within these remnants lies a blueprint not just of loss, but of survival strategies refined over thousands of years. Across continents, certain architectural and cultural patterns repeat with uncanny consistency. Monumental structures are frequently built at geologically stable points, often atop bedrock formations resistant to seismic activity. Many are positioned along fault lines, not because the builders were careless, but because these locations allowed access to geothermal energy, mineral-rich water, or natural resonance points. These choices reflect an advanced understanding of the Earth as a dynamic system rather than a passive surface. The builders of these ancient sites appeared to recognize that survival depended on harmony with natural forces, not dominance over them. Their structures often integrated seamlessly into the landscape, functioning as extensions of the environment rather than impositions upon it. This philosophy contrasts sharply with the extractive mindset of modern civilization, which prioritizes control over coexistence. Evidence of this worldview can be found in the orientation of ancient cities. Many were designed with precise astronomical alignment, tracking solstices, equinoxes, and stellar cycles with remarkable accuracy. These alignments were not decorative. They served as calendars, agricultural guides, and early warning systems for environmental change. By observing the sky, ancient societies could anticipate shifts in climate and prepare accordingly. Such knowledge required long-term observation and intergenerational transmission. It implies stable societies capable of maintaining records over centuries. This continuity challenges the assumption that ancient people lived in a state of constant instability. Instead, it suggests periods of remarkable equilibrium, punctuated by sudden collapse. The collapse, when it came, often arrived swiftly. Evidence from ice cores, sediment layers, and fossil records indicates abrupt climate shifts that would have devastated unprepared populations. Droughts, floods, and temperature swings reshaped entire regions within human lifetimes. Civilizations that had flourished for millennia were erased in mere generations. Yet even in collapse, there is evidence of intent. The deliberate burial of structures, the preservation of tools, and the transmission of myths suggest that survivors sought to preserve knowledge for those who would come after. These acts were not random. They were deliberate attempts to communicate across time. Language alone was insufficient for this task. Words change too easily. Meanings drift. Instead, ancient cultures encoded knowledge in forms that transcended language: geometry, proportion, orientation, and myth. These were universal languages capable of surviving cultural transformation. Symbols carved in stone carried layered meanings accessible to different levels of understanding. To the uninitiated, they were decorative or religious. To the initiated, they conveyed technical information about astronomy, geography, and cosmology. This dual-layer communication allowed knowledge to persist even as societies transformed. Over time, however, the ability to interpret these symbols diminished. The symbolic language became ritualized, its original meaning obscured. Rituals continued, but their purpose was forgotten. What remained was form without function, a hollow echo of deeper understanding. This pattern repeated across civilizations. Knowledge was preserved, degraded, and eventually mythologized. The result is a global tapestry of myths that share striking similarities despite geographic separation. Floods, fires, World trees, sky beings, and cycles of destruction recur with remarkable consistency. These shared motifs are not coincidences. They are fragments of a collective memory shaped by shared experiences of catastrophe. They represent humanity's attempt to encode survival lessons in stories that could endure when technical knowledge could not. The persistence of these myths suggests that ancient societies were acutely aware of the fragility of civilization. They understood that progress was temporary and that survival depended on adaptability and remembrance. Their stories served as warnings to future generations who might forget the lessons of the past. Modern society, however, often dismisses these narratives as superstition. In doing so, it risks repeating the very mistakes that led to previous collapses. The assumption that technological advancement equates to immunity from catastrophe blinds us to our vulnerabilities. Despite our advancements, we remain subject to the same natural forces that shaped ancient history. Climate systems, geological activity, and cosmic events continue to operate independently of human ambition. The difference now lies in scale. Our global civilization is interconnected to an unprecedented degree, making it more vulnerable to systemic failure. The lessons embedded in ancient structures and myths offer guidance for navigating this precarious reality. They emphasize balance, foresight, and respect for natural systems. They warn against overreach and hubris. They remind us that survival depends not on domination, but on adaptation. As these lessons resurface through archaeological discovery and scientific inquiry, humanity faces a choice. We can dismiss the past as primitive and irrelevant, or we can recognize it as a repository of hard-earned wisdom. The former leads to repetition. The latter offers the possibility of resilience. The continuity of human experience is written not only in texts, but in landscapes, monuments, and myths. Each generation inherits this silent archive, whether it chooses to read it or not. The question is no longer whether the past holds relevance, but whether we are willing to listen. The story of humanity is not one of linear progress, but of cyclical renewal. Each cycle brings destruction and rebirth, loss and rediscovery. The difference between extinction and endurance lies in the ability to learn from what came before. As the evidence accumulates, it becomes increasingly clear that the ancient world was not as primitive as once believed. It was complex, interconnected, and deeply aware of its place within a larger cosmic order. Its downfall was not due to ignorance, but perhaps to the same forces that now challenge us. The remnants of that world still speak, etched into stone and memory. They urge caution, humility, and respect for the delicate balance that sustains civilization. Whether we heed their message will determine not only how we understand the past, but whether we have a future at all. As the remnants of forgotten ages continue to surface, another pattern emerges, one that challenges the very foundation of modern assumptions about progress, intelligence, and permanence. The story that unfolds is not one of linear ascent, but of repetition shaped by memory loss. Civilizations rise, refine themselves, reach extraordinary heights, and then collapse, leaving only faint traces behind. What survives is not their technology, but the echo of their worldview, etched into stone, myth, and instinct. The more deeply researchers examine the archaeological record, the more apparent it becomes that ancient societies possessed an advanced understanding of natural forces. This understanding was not theoretical, it was practical experiential, and embedded into daily life. Structures were built to channel wind, water, and sound. Cities were positioned to harness seasonal flows of energy. Entire landscapes were shaped with an awareness of geomagnetic currents and solar cycles. These were not accidental achievements. They required planning, observation, and knowledge accumulated over long periods of stability. Such stability implies a relationship with the environment that modern civilization has largely forgotten. Ancient cultures did not attempt to dominate nature. Instead, they learned to cooperate with it. Their survival depended on balance rather than extraction. When that balance was disrupted, whether by climatic shifts or internal overreach, the consequences were swift and devastating. The archaeological record reveals that collapse was rarely caused by a single event. It was the culmination of cascading stresses: climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, and environmental mismanagement. These factors compounded until systems designed for stability became sources of vulnerability. When collapse came, it did not announce itself dramatically. It unfolded gradually, then all at once. What makes this pattern so unsettling is its familiarity. The same conditions that preceded ancient collapses are visible today. Rising temperatures, shifting weather patterns, diminishing resources, and social fragmentation echo the warning signs embedded in ancient ruins. The past is not merely repeating, it is resurfacing. Yet ancient civilizations were not passive victims of circumstance. They adapted in remarkable ways. Evidence suggests that many societies relocated entire populations in response to environmental changes. Others restructured their social systems, prioritizing resilience over expansion. These adaptations reveal a sophisticated understanding of long-term survival strategies. One of the most striking features of ancient resilience is the emphasis on continuity rather than permanence. Instead of building for eternity, many cultures designed systems meant to endure change. Their architecture allowed for modification. Their social structures emphasized memory and tradition. Their myths encoded lessons meant to guide future generations through similar trials. These myths often depict cycles of destruction and renewal, framed as moral or cosmic events. Floods cleanse the world. Fires purify it. Darkness precedes rebirth. Such narratives are not mere allegories. They are cultural tools for transmitting survival knowledge across generations. By embedding lessons within stories, ancient societies ensured that critical information would persist even when formal education collapsed. Modern society, by contrast, places immense faith in technology while neglecting the wisdom embedded in narrative. Data is stored digitally, vulnerable to decay and obsolescence. Languages evolve rapidly, severing connections to the past. In contrast, myths endure precisely because they are adaptable. They evolve with each retelling while preserving core truths. This difference reveals a fundamental flaw in modern thinking: the belief that progress is irreversible. History suggests otherwise. Every advanced society believed itself to be exceptional, immune to collapse. Each was wrong. The ruins scattered across the globe testify to a repeating pattern of hubris followed by downfall. What sets the present moment apart is awareness. For the first time, humanity possesses the ability to recognize this pattern consciously. We can see the echoes of past collapses and identify the forces that caused them. The question is, whether awareness alone is sufficient to alter the outcome. Technological sophistication does not guarantee wisdom. The tools that enable unprecedented connectivity also accelerate instability. Global systems are interconnected in ways that amplify risk. A failure in one region can cascade across the planet. The very complexity that defines modern civilization makes it fragile. Yet within this fragility lies opportunity. Understanding the mistakes of the past offers a chance to choose a different path. The lessons preserved in ancient ruins and myths are not relics of superstition. They are guides forged through experience. They caution against excess, warn of imbalance, and emphasize the necessity of harmony between humanity and its environment. The ancients understood that survival depended on respect for forces beyond human control. They observed the rhythms of the natural world and adapted accordingly. Their knowledge was not abstract, but experiential, rooted in generations of observation and adaptation. That wisdom, though fragmented, remains accessible to those willing to seek it. Reintegrating this perspective does not require abandoning modern science. On the contrary, it demands a synthesis of ancient insight and contemporary understanding. By combining empirical knowledge with an appreciation for long-term patterns, humanity can begin to address the challenges it faces with greater clarity. The ruins of past civilizations serve as reminders of what happens when balance is lost. They stand as cautionary monuments, not to failure, but to the consequences of forgetting. Their silence speaks volumes to those willing to listen. As the modern world stands at a crossroads, the choice becomes clear. Continue along a path of short-term gain and eventual collapse, or learn from the cycles etched into history and chart a more sustainable course. The past offers guidance, not destiny. The knowledge embedded in ancient structures, myths, and landscapes is not obsolete. It is dormant, waiting to be reinterpreted. By listening to the echoes of those who came before, humanity may yet avoid repeating their fate. The cycle does not demand repetition. It demands understanding. And in that understanding lies the possibility of renewal, not as a return to the past, but as an evolution informed by it. The lessons are written in stone, waiting for those willing to read them. As humanity advances deeper into the modern age, the distance between knowledge and understanding grows wider. We possess unprecedented access to information, yet struggle to interpret its meaning. This paradox becomes especially apparent when examining the long arc of human history. The deeper we look, the more the past challenges our assumptions about progress, intelligence, and destiny. What emerges is not a linear ascent, but a repeating rhythm of creation, collapse, and renewal, shaped by forces both internal and external to civilization. The remains of ancient cultures suggest that humanity has faced moments of profound reckoning before. These moments did not arise from ignorance, but from imbalance. Civilizations expanded rapidly, harnessed the resources of their environments, and achieved remarkable complexity. Over time, however, this complexity became a vulnerability. Systems designed for efficiency lost resilience. When disruption arrived, whether environmental, social, or cosmic, the structures that once sustained life became points of failure. Evidence of these cycles is embedded in the archaeological record. Layers of sediment reveal abrupt transitions rather than gradual change. Settlements appear, flourish, and vanish in geological instants. In many cases, entire regions show signs of sudden abandonment rather than slow decline. Such patterns point toward catastrophic events that overwhelmed even advanced societies. These events were not isolated. Similar markers appear across continents, synchronized in time despite geographic separation. Flood deposits, burned layers, and sudden shifts in climate appear in the same eras worldwide. This synchronicity suggests a common cause, one powerful enough to reshape the planet on a global scale. Ancient cultures seem to have recognized these cycles and attempted to prepare for them. Their myths speak of recurring ages marked by destruction and rebirth. These stories were not meant to inspire fear, but awareness. They served as warnings encoded in narrative, ensuring that knowledge of past cataclysms would survive even if written records were lost. Architecture played a crucial role in this preservation. Monuments were constructed not merely as symbols of power, but as markers of time and memory. Their alignments tracked celestial cycles, embedding astronomical knowledge into stone. These structures functioned as calendars, observatories, and repositories of encoded information meant to endure beyond the lifespan of any single culture. Over time, however, the purpose behind these constructions faded. As societies changed, the original meanings were obscured. Later generations inherited the structures without the context necessary to understand them. What remained was reverence without comprehension, ritual without insight. This gradual loss of understanding mirrors the broader pattern of human history. Knowledge accumulates, peaks, and then dissipates. Each cycle leaves behind fragments that future civilizations rediscover and reinterpret. The danger lies in mistaking these fragments for complete understanding. Modern society stands at a unique point in this cycle. For the first time, humanity has the tools to uncover its own deep past with unprecedented precision. Technologies such as satellite imaging, radiometric dating, and genetic analysis have revealed layers of history previously invisible. Yet despite this, the lessons of that history remain largely unheeded. One reason lies in the structure of modern thinking. Contemporary culture often prioritizes short-term gains over long-term stability. Economic systems reward growth without regard for sustainability. Technological advancement is pursued without sufficient consideration of its consequences. This mindset mirrors the conditions that preceded past collapses. Ancient societies, though lacking modern technology, often possessed a deeper awareness of limits. Their myths warned against excess, hubris, and imbalance. They understood that survival required harmony with natural forces rather than domination over them. These lessons were encoded in rituals, laws, and sacred narratives that reinforced restraint. In contrast, modern civilization often views nature as an obstacle to be conquered. This perspective fosters exploitation rather than coexistence. The result is a growing disconnect between human activity and the planet's capacity to sustain it. The consequences of this disconnect are increasingly visible in climate instability, ecological degradation, and social unrest. The repetition of these patterns suggests that humanity is caught in a loop, reenacting the same mistakes under different guises. Each iteration becomes more technologically advanced, but also more vulnerable. The scale of modern infrastructure means that failure now carries global consequences. Yet awareness of this cycle presents an opportunity. Unlike previous civilizations, modern humanity has access to vast amounts of historical and scientific data. We can identify patterns that were invisible to our predecessors. We can learn not only from our own past, but from the accumulated experiences of countless cultures before us. Breaking the cycle requires a shift in perspective. Progress must be redefined not as endless expansion, but as sustainable balance. Technological innovation must be guided by ethical responsibility. Cultural memory must be preserved not as nostalgia, but as instruction. The remnants of ancient civilizations are not relics of failure. They are warnings etched into the fabric of the earth. They remind us that knowledge alone is insufficient without wisdom. Power without restraint leads inevitably to collapse. As humanity stands at another turning point, the lessons of the past grow increasingly urgent. The question is no longer whether civilizations rise and fall, but whether this one can learn from those that came before. The answer will determine whether the story of humanity continues or becomes another chapter buried beneath the sands of time. The echoes of ancient voices still resonate, not as myths to be dismissed, but as guidance offered across millennia. They speak of balance, humility, and awareness. To listen is to acknowledge that progress without memory is illusion. To ignore them is to repeat a cycle already written in stone. The choice lies not in discovering new technologies, but in rediscovering wisdom long forgotten. Only then can humanity hope to break free from the repeating rhythm of rise and collapse that has defined its past. The path forward begins with remembering what was lost and choosing not to lose it again. As the fragments of humanity's forgotten epochs continue to surface, a sobering realization emerges. History is not a straight road leading forward, but a spiral that repeatedly returns to familiar ground. Each turn carries echoes of the last, shaped by the same forces of ambition, ignorance, adaptation, and collapse. What changes from era to era is not the pattern itself, but humanity's awareness of it. The civilizations that came before did not fail because they lacked intelligence. They failed because intelligence alone proved insufficient when separated from restraint. Over time, innovation outpaced wisdom, and expansion outpaced balance. The structures they built, both physical and social, became increasingly complex and fragile. When stressors accumulated, collapse was not sudden chaos, but the inevitable result of accumulated imbalance. Evidence of this pattern is preserved not only in ruins, but in the evolution of human behavior. Societies that once functioned cooperatively grew hierarchical. Power centralized. Resources became unevenly distributed. The systems meant to protect people began to serve themselves. These transformations occurred gradually, almost invisibly, until resilience gave way to fragility. As environmental conditions shifted, the weaknesses of such systems were exposed. Droughts, floods, and shifting climates tested the limits of adaptation. Instead of responding collectively, societies fractured. Competition replaced cooperation. Short-term survival replaced long-term planning. The result was collapse, followed by long periods of regression. Yet collapse was never total. Knowledge survived in fragments, encoded in myths, rituals, and symbols. These fragments were carried by survivors who rebuilt in the aftermath. Over generations, the meaning of the knowledge blurred, but its structure remained. This is why ancient stories from different cultures share common themes. Floods that cleanse the world, fires that reset civilization, and heroes who preserve knowledge through catastrophe. These recurring motifs are not coincidences or fantasies. They are memory traces embedded in cultural DNA. Just as biological traits are passed through generations, so too are narratives that encode collective experience. These stories endure because they contain survival information compressed into symbolic form. As civilizations rose again, they reused these inherited frameworks, often without understanding their origins. Monuments were built atop older foundations. Sacred sites were repurposed. The past became a scaffold for the present. Over time, the original meanings faded, leaving behind ritual without context. This process repeated across continents. From the Americas to Eurasia, from Africa to Oceania, similar patterns emerged independently, yet simultaneously. The parallels are too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. They suggest a shared human experience shaped by common challenges and responses. The modern world stands at the culmination of these cycles. Our technology has granted us unprecedented power, but it has also amplified our vulnerabilities. Global interdependence means that localized disruptions can cascade into worldwide crises. The systems that sustain modern life are efficient but brittle, optimized for growth rather than resilience. This fragility mirrors the conditions that preceded earlier collapses. Climate instability, resource depletion, and social inequality are not new phenomena. They are recurring themes in the history of civilization. The difference today lies in scale. The impact of failure would be global, and the recovery far more uncertain. Despite this, humanity possesses an advantage its predecessors lacked: the ability to learn from a vast archive of past experiences. Archaeology, climatology, and anthropology have revealed patterns that were invisible to earlier societies. For the first time, the full arc of human history is coming into focus. This knowledge carries responsibility. Understanding the cycles that govern civilization demands a shift in perspective. Progress must be measured not by expansion or consumption, but by sustainability and resilience. The goal is not domination of nature, but coexistence with it. Ancient societies understood this instinctively. Their myths emphasized balance, their architecture respected natural forces, and their social structures reflected an awareness of limits. When these principles were abandoned, collapse followed. The lesson is clear. Survival depends not on power, but on harmony. The challenge facing modern civilization is whether it can integrate this ancient wisdom with contemporary knowledge. Technology alone cannot prevent collapse if it is wielded without foresight. Innovation must be guided by an understanding of long-term consequences. The ruins scattered across the globe are not merely remnants of the past, they are messages addressed to the future. They warn of the cost of arrogance and the fragility of complex systems. They remind us that progress without wisdom is temporary. As humanity stands at another turning point, the question is not whether collapse is possible, but whether it is inevitable. The answer depends on our ability to learn from those who came before. Their failures are written in stone, waiting to be read. The choice before us is stark. We can continue repeating the same patterns, driven by short-term gains and blind faith in progress. Or we can recognize the cycles that shape history and choose a different path, one rooted in balance, humility, and foresight. The past is not a distant land. It is a mirror reflecting our present choices. To ignore its lessons is to invite repetition. To heed them is to break the cycle and redefine what it means to endure. In the end, the survival of civilization will not be determined by technology alone, but by wisdom, the ability to remember, to learn, and to act with foresight. The story of humanity is still being written, and its next chapter depends on whether we choose to listen to the echoes of those who came before us. As the echoes of past civilizations continue to ripple through time, another realization emerges, one that reframes humanity's place within the vast rhythm of existence. The rise and fall of civilizations is not merely a historical pattern. It is a biological and planetary phenomenon. Just as ecosystems rise and collapse, human societies follow cycles governed by forces far older and more powerful than any ideology or empire. At the core of this pattern lies adaptation. Species that survive are not those that dominate, but those that adjust. The same principle applies to civilizations. Those that endure are not the ones that build the tallest monuments or accumulate the greatest wealth, but those that understand the limits imposed by their environment. When this balance is lost, collapse becomes inevitable. Ancient cultures seemed acutely aware of this reality. Their myths often centered on balance, between sky and earth, light and dark, order and chaos. These were not abstract philosophies, but practical frameworks for survival. To live in harmony with the cycles of nature was not a spiritual luxury. It was a necessity. The failure to do so carried consequences that history has recorded repeatedly. One of the most striking aspects of ancient knowledge is its emphasis on cyclical time. Unlike the linear progression favored by modern thought, early civilizations viewed time as a series of repeating ages. Each age began with creation, matured through growth, and ended in destruction. This cyclical worldview allowed societies to contextualize catastrophe not as an end, but as part of a recurring process. Such thinking fostered resilience. When catastrophe struck, it was not interpreted as random chaos, but as a phase within a larger pattern. This perspective allowed communities to rebuild without despair, to preserve knowledge for future generations rather than surrender to nihilism. It also encouraged long-term thinking, as actions were measured against their impact across multiple generations. The disappearance of this cyclical understanding coincided with the rise of linear thinking. Progress became the dominant narrative. Time was reimagined as a straight line moving toward constant improvement. While this mindset fueled innovation, it also fostered complacency. Believing themselves removed from the cycles of the past, societies began to ignore the warning signs encoded in history. This shift had profound consequences. The abandonment of cyclical awareness led to exploitation of resources, destabilization of ecosystems, and a growing disconnect between human activity and natural limits. What once were understood as boundaries became challenges to be overcome, often with destructive results. Ancient societies, in contrast, structured their lives around rhythms they observed in nature. Agricultural calendars aligned with celestial cycles. Architecture reflected seasonal patterns. Rituals reinforced the understanding that survival depended on maintaining balance. These practices were not superstition. They were adaptive strategies refined over millennia. As knowledge was lost or fragmented, these practices degraded into ritual without understanding. The symbolism remained, but the underlying purpose faded. Over time, the rituals became ceremonial rather than functional, and their practical benefits were forgotten. The modern world, armed with advanced technology, often dismisses these ancient systems as primitive. Yet many of the challenges faced today, climate instability, resource depletion, social fragmentation, mirror those that preceded earlier collapses. The difference lies in scale and speed, not in essence. Scientific advancements have revealed that Earth operates as a complex, interconnected system. Small changes can produce cascading effects across the entire planet. This understanding aligns closely with ancient perspectives that emphasized balance and interconnectedness. In many ways, modern science is rediscovering truths that ancient cultures intuitively understood. The recognition of these patterns offers an opportunity for course correction. By studying the successes and failures of past civilizations, humanity can gain insight into sustainable paths forward. This requires humility, the willingness to accept that progress does not equate to superiority and that knowledge can be lost as easily as it is gained. The enduring presence of ancient structures, myths, and symbols serves as a reminder that human history is cyclical. These remnants are not relics of ignorance, but testaments to resilience. They challenge the assumption that modern society is the pinnacle of human achievement. Understanding this cyclical nature does not diminish human potential. It enhances it. It encourages a long-term perspective that values preservation over exploitation. It fosters respect for natural systems that sustain life, and it emphasizes the importance of foresight in shaping the future. As humanity stands at a critical juncture, the lessons of the past become increasingly relevant. Climate instability, resource scarcity, and social fragmentation echo conditions that preceded previous collapses. The difference now is awareness. For the first time, humanity can see the patterns unfolding in real time. The choice before us is not whether history will repeat itself, but how consciously it will do so. By acknowledging the cycles that govern existence, humanity can choose to adapt rather than react. This requires humility, cooperation, and a willingness to learn from the past rather than dismiss it. The remnants of ancient civilizations are not warnings etched in stone for academic curiosity alone. They are messages directed at the present, urging reflection and responsibility. They remind us that progress without wisdom is unsustainable, and that survival depends on harmony with forces larger than ourselves. As the cycle continues, the question remains: will humanity recognize the pattern in time to alter its course, or will it follow the well-worn path of those who came before? The answer lies not in technology or conquest, but in understanding the rhythms that govern existence itself. In this recognition lies the possibility of transformation, not the kind born of collapse, but of conscious evolution. The past has spoken. Whether its message is heard will define the future. As the layers of time continue to unfold, a deeper realization takes shape, one that challenges humanity's most deeply held assumptions about progress, intelligence, and survival. The story emerging from the ruins of the past is not simply about lost civilizations, but about a recurring failure to recognize limits. Each great collapse carries the same lesson, encoded not in language, but in consequence. Advancement without understanding leads not to ascension, but to erasure. Throughout history, societies have mistaken complexity for mastery. They built systems of immense sophistication, believing that scale and ingenuity alone guaranteed permanence. Yet these same systems often became the very mechanisms of collapse. When networks grew too intricate, they became fragile. When dependence on centralized control increased, resilience declined. The more advanced the structure, the more catastrophic its failure. Ancient cultures appeared to understand this paradox intuitively. Their architectural and societal designs reveal an awareness of balance that modern civilization has largely abandoned. Cities were built in harmony with terrain, rather than imposed upon it. Agricultural systems were integrated with natural cycles rather than forcing unnatural yields. Energy was drawn from renewable sources, sun, wind, water, not extracted through destructive means. This balance was not accidental. It reflected a worldview in which humanity was a participant within a greater system, not its master. The environment was not an adversary to be conquered, but a living framework to be respected. When that balance was disrupted through overexploitation, climatic shifts, or societal overreach, the consequences were swift and severe. The evidence of such collapses is etched into the geological and archaeological record. Layers of sediment reveal periods of sudden abandonment. Cities that once thrived were deserted almost overnight. Agricultural terraces fell into disuse. Trade networks collapsed. These were not slow declines, but abrupt transitions, signaling systemic failure rather than gradual decay. What is striking is how often these collapses occurred despite advanced knowledge. Many ancient societies possessed sophisticated understanding of astronomy, engineering, and ecology. Their downfall was not due to ignorance, but to the inability to adapt when conditions changed. Flexibility, not intelligence, proved to be the deciding factor. This realization reframes the narrative of human progress. It suggests that survival is not guaranteed by technological prowess alone. Adaptability, humility, and foresight are equally essential. When societies lose the ability to respond to change, even the most advanced systems become liabilities. In examining ancient ruins, one notices a recurring pattern: the presence of infrastructure designed for resilience. Water management systems, for example, were often more advanced than modern equivalents. Terracing prevented erosion, reservoirs captured seasonal rains, and canals distributed water efficiently. These systems required deep environmental understanding and long-term planning. Yet despite such sophistication, these societies eventually faltered. Their downfall was not due to ignorance, but to circumstances that exceeded their capacity to adapt. Climate shifts, resource depletion, and social upheaval converged, overwhelming even the most resilient systems. The lesson is sobering. No civilization, regardless of its ingenuity, is immune to collapse. The relevance of this lesson is profound in the modern context. Today's world faces challenges of unprecedented scale: climate change, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity, and technological dependency. Unlike past societies, however, humanity now possesses the ability to observe these patterns in real time. The question is whether this awareness will translate into meaningful action. The study of ancient collapses offers valuable insight into how societies can either adapt or fail. It reveals that resilience depends not on domination, but on harmony. Civilizations that thrived longest were those that integrated themselves into natural systems rather than attempting to override them. This perspective challenges modern assumptions about progress. It suggests that advancement should be measured not by growth alone, but by sustainability and adaptability. The most successful societies were those that understood their limits and planned accordingly. The echoes of ancient wisdom can still be found in surviving cultural practices. Indigenous knowledge systems around the world emphasize balance, stewardship, and respect for natural cycles. These traditions, often dismissed as primitive, may hold the key to addressing contemporary challenges. As modern science begins to validate concepts long held by traditional cultures, a convergence emerges. Ecology, systems theory, and sustainability science echo principles that ancient societies practiced intuitively. This convergence suggests that progress may require not innovation alone, but reconciliation between past and present knowledge. The realization that humanity has walked this path before carries both warning and hope. It warns that collapse is possible, even likely, if patterns go unrecognized. But it also offers hope that awareness can alter outcomes. Unlike previous civilizations, humanity now possesses the tools to understand its own trajectory. The challenge lies in translating understanding into action. Knowledge without application changes nothing. The lessons encoded in ancient ruins and myths demand not admiration, but integration into modern decision-making. They call for a re-evaluation of priorities and a redefinition of success. The future will be shaped by how well humanity learns from its own history. If the past is ignored, the cycle will continue unbroken. If it is understood, there is potential for transformation. The choice lies not in technology or destiny, but in awareness. As the echoes of ancient worlds continue to resonate, they offer a final reminder. Civilizations do not fall because they lack intelligence, but because they forget wisdom. The path forward depends on whether humanity chooses to remember. As the long arc of human history unfolds, another truth becomes unavoidable. Civilizations do not fall solely because of external forces. They unravel from within, long before the final collapse becomes visible. The ruins scattered across the planet are not merely remnants of disaster. They are symptoms of gradual internal decay. Long before the last stone fell or the final city was abandoned, the foundations had already weakened beneath the weight of contradiction, excess, and forgetting. At the height of every advanced society, there exists a moment of profound imbalance. Prosperity breeds complexity, and complexity breeds fragility. Systems designed to increase efficiency become so intricate that they can no longer adapt. What once served survival begins to demand constant maintenance. Resources that once sustained growth become strained, and the very structures meant to protect society begin to consume it from within. Ancient civilizations reached this threshold many times. Archaeological evidence reveals periods of immense prosperity followed by sudden decline. These were not gradual fades, but sharp breaks, marked by population collapse, abandonment of cities, and the disappearance of centralized authority. In many cases, the environment did not change dramatically at first. It was the social framework that failed. Power became concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority bore the burden of sustaining increasingly complex systems. As inequality deepened, social cohesion eroded. The bonds that once held communities together weakened, replaced by competition and distrust. When crisis struck, whether through drought, famine, or invasion, society lacked the unity necessary to respond effectively. The collapse was often swift. Administrative systems failed, trade networks disintegrated, specialized knowledge vanished as experts perished or fled. Without shared understanding, even basic infrastructure became impossible to maintain. Cities that once thrived became silent ruins, their purpose forgotten within a few generations. This pattern repeats with striking consistency across cultures separated by vast distances. It suggests that collapse is not an anomaly, but a recurring phase in the life cycle of complex societies. Growth leads to complexity. Complexity breeds vulnerability, and vulnerability invites collapse. Yet collapse does not signify the end of humanity. Rather, it marks a transition, a shedding of unsustainable structures, and the emergence of new forms. Survivors adapt, reorganize, and begin again, often with a renewed respect for the limits of their environment. The knowledge that endures becomes the foundation for future societies. The remnants of past civilizations serve as warnings and guides. They demonstrate what happens when societies lose balance, when ambition outpaces wisdom. The patterns etched into stone and soil are lessons written across millennia, waiting to be recognized. One of the most striking aspects of these cycles is the persistence of human creativity, even in the face of collapse. Art, ritual, and storytelling persist long after political structures fall. These expressions preserve identity and memory, enabling continuity across generations. They serve as bridges between eras, carrying fragments of knowledge through the darkness. In many cases, the most enduring legacies are not technological, but cultural. Language, myth, and symbolism outlast cities and empires. They adapt, evolve, and resurface in new forms, carrying echoes of ancient experiences. Through them, humanity maintains a connection to its past, even when physical evidence has vanished. The resilience of these cultural threads suggests that humanity possesses an inherent capacity for renewal. Even when civilizations crumble, the impulse to create, remember, and rebuild endures. This resilience has allowed humanity to survive repeated upheavals and emerge with renewed purpose. However, resilience alone is not enough. Without reflection, the same mistakes are repeated. The challenge lies in recognizing patterns before they culminate in collapse. This requires humility, a willingness to acknowledge that progress is not guaranteed and that wisdom must be actively cultivated. In the modern world, the signs of strain are unmistakable. Environmental degradation, social fragmentation, and technological overreach mirror conditions that preceded past declines. The difference lies in scale. The interconnectedness of modern society means that failure in one region can ripple across the globe. Despite these challenges, there is reason for cautious optimism. Never before has humanity possessed such comprehensive knowledge of its own history. Archaeology, climatology, and anthropology together paint a detailed picture of past successes and failures. This knowledge provides an unprecedented opportunity to break the cycle. Learning from the past requires more than academic study. It demands a shift in values, a recognition that progress must be measured not by accumulation, but by sustainability and resilience. It requires a reimagining of success that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term gain. The ancient civilizations that collapsed did not lack intelligence or creativity. They lacked the ability to adapt quickly enough to changing circumstances. Their downfall was not inevitable, but the result of choices made over generations. Understanding this empowers modern society to choose differently. As humanity stands at a crossroads, the lessons of history grow ever more relevant. The ruins of the past are not relics of failure, but warnings etched into the landscape. They urge restraint, foresight, and humility. The story of civilization is not a straight ascent toward perfection, but a complex dance between creation and destruction. Each generation inherits the consequences of those before it and shapes the conditions for those that follow. Awareness of this continuity is the first step toward breaking destructive cycles. The future remains unwritten. Whether humanity repeats the mistakes of the past or learns from them will determine the trajectory of civilization. The knowledge exists. The evidence is clear. What remains is the choice to listen, to adapt, and to act with wisdom forged from the long memory of human experience. As humanity moves deeper into the present age, the weight of accumulated history presses more heavily upon the collective consciousness. The further we advance technologically, the more apparent it becomes that progress alone does not guarantee wisdom. The ruins scattered across the earth stand as quiet witnesses to this truth, reminding us that intelligence without restraint leads not to permanence, but to repetition. Each fallen civilization reflects a moment when ambition surpassed understanding, when momentum overtook meaning. The defining feature of past collapses was not ignorance, but overconfidence. Civilizations reached a point where their achievements convinced them of permanence. Their systems appeared too advanced to fail, their institutions too entrenched to crumble. This illusion of invincibility proved to be their greatest vulnerability. Once societies began to believe they had transcended the natural limits governing existence, they stopped preparing for disruption. Resilience gave way to rigidity. This pattern is evident in the archaeological record. Cities expanded beyond their ecological capacity, exhausting water sources and degrading fertile land. Trade networks became so vast that a disruption in one region could destabilize entire civilizations. Social hierarchies grew rigid, preventing adaptation and innovation. When environmental or social stressors finally struck, collapse followed swiftly. What distinguishes these ancient failures from mere historical curiosities is how closely they mirror present conditions. Modern civilization exhibits similar traits: dependence on fragile systems, concentration of resources, and an unwavering belief in perpetual progress. The difference lies not in the pattern, but in the scale. Today's interconnected world amplifies both success and failure on a global level. Ancient societies, however, did not view collapse solely as catastrophe. Many recognized it as a phase within a larger cycle. Myths and oral traditions often describe eras of darkness followed by renewal. These narratives served as cultural memory, preserving lessons about adaptation and renewal. They offered frameworks for understanding change not as an end, but as transformation. This cyclical worldview fostered resilience. It taught that collapse, while devastating, was also an opportunity for rebirth. Societies that embraced this perspective were better equipped to recover, rebuild, and evolve. They understood that permanence was an illusion, but continuity could be preserved through knowledge and tradition. In contrast, modern culture tends to deny impermanence. The emphasis on growth, efficiency, and control has fostered a sense of invulnerability. Yet the same forces that enabled unprecedented advancement have also amplified risk. Climate instability, ecological degradation, and systemic inequality threaten the foundations of contemporary life. The ancient world offers a counterpoint to this mindset. Its people recognized limits and structured their societies accordingly. They developed systems that balanced human needs with environmental constraints. When those systems failed, the reasons were remembered and passed down through story and ritual. This transmission of knowledge was not always precise, but it was resilient. Stories evolved, adapted, and survived where written records did not. Through myth, essential truths were preserved across millennia. These narratives were not literal histories, but symbolic maps of experience, encoding lessons about survival, cooperation, and restraint. The modern tendency to dismiss myth as fiction overlooks its function as a repository of collective memory. Myths preserved information in forms that could endure cultural upheaval. They carried warnings disguised as tales, ensuring that critical knowledge survived even when civilizations did not. As contemporary society confronts unprecedented challenges, these ancient narratives regain relevance. They remind us that technological sophistication does not equate to wisdom. They caution against hubris and emphasize the importance of harmony with natural systems. The challenge of the present era lies in reconciling technological capability with ecological responsibility. The tools humanity possesses today are powerful enough to reshape the planet, for better or worse. The direction taken will depend on whether lessons from the past are acknowledged or ignored. Modern science has begun to validate insights long embedded in ancient traditions. Concepts such as ecological balance, systemic interdependence, and feedback loops echo principles found in ancient philosophies. This convergence suggests that the divide between ancient wisdom and modern science is narrowing. Yet awareness alone is insufficient. Knowledge must be integrated into decision-making processes at every level. Societies must reevaluate priorities, shifting from short-term gain to long-term sustainability. This requires a cultural transformation as profound as any technological revolution. The ruins of past civilizations serve as cautionary monuments. They stand not as relics of failure, but as testaments to humanity's capacity for both greatness and self-destruction. Their silent testimony urges reflection on the choices that shape collective destiny. As the world faces mounting challenges, the opportunity arises to redefine progress. Instead of measuring success by expansion and consumption, a new paradigm can emerge, one that values resilience, balance, and continuity. Such a shift would represent not regression, but maturation. The story of humanity is still being written. Each generation adds a chapter shaped by its decisions. The wisdom embedded in the ruins of the past offers guidance, if only it is heeded. The question is not whether civilization will change, but whether it will do so consciously. The echoes of ancient worlds resonate in the present, inviting reflection rather than fear. They remind us that survival depends not on dominance, but on understanding. As humanity stands at another threshold, the choice remains the same as it has always been: to learn from the past or to repeat it. In recognizing the patterns that bind history together, a path forward becomes visible. It is not a return to the past, but an integration of its lessons. The future depends on our willingness to listen to the quiet warnings carved into stone and memory alike. As the long arc of human history continues to unfold, a sobering truth becomes impossible to ignore. Civilizations do not disappear because they fail to innovate, but because they forget why they exist. Innovation without purpose becomes excess, and excess inevitably breeds collapse. The ruins scattered across the world are not monuments to failure, but to imbalance, warnings etched into stone by societies that lost alignment between knowledge, responsibility, and restraint. Every great civilization begins with an intimate understanding of its environment. Early societies thrived not through domination, but through synchronization. They learned the rhythms of the land, the behavior of rivers, the patterns of the sky. Their survival depended on recognizing limits and adapting to them. This harmony fostered resilience, allowing cultures to endure for centuries, sometimes millennia. Over time, success altered perspective. What began as adaptation transformed into control. Landscapes were reshaped, ecosystems bent to human will, and natural cycles treated as obstacles rather than guides. The same ingenuity that once ensured survival gradually eroded the delicate balance that sustained it. This transition marked the beginning of decline, though it often went unnoticed by those living through it. Historical evidence reveals that collapse rarely arrives suddenly. It unfolds gradually, masked by prosperity and technological triumphs. Infrastructure grows more complex, societies more interconnected, and dependence on centralized systems increases. In this stage, resilience gives way to fragility. A single disruption, drought, conflict, or environmental shift can trigger cascading failures. Ancient civilizations experienced this pattern repeatedly. The fall of once great cultures was not the result of a single catastrophe, but a convergence of pressures. Environmental stress, resource depletion, social inequality, and political rigidity combined to create conditions from which recovery was impossible. The collapse appeared sudden only in hindsight. In reality, it was long in the making. Despite these failures, each civilization left behind traces of wisdom. Their art, architecture, and myths encoded lessons learned through hardship. These remnants reveal an understanding of cycles, of growth, decline, and renewal. They suggest that collapse was not always viewed as an end, but as a transformation within a larger continuum. The persistence of these ideas across cultures points to a shared human experience. From the rise and fall of ancient cities to the cyclical myths of creation and destruction, humanity has long recognized that permanence is an illusion. The challenge has never been to avoid change, but to navigate it wisely. Modern society stands at a similar crossroads. Technological advancement has accelerated beyond precedent, reshaping the planet in mere centuries. While these innovations have brought comfort and convenience, they have also introduced vulnerabilities. The interconnected systems that sustain modern life are efficient but fragile, dependent on stability that cannot be guaranteed. The illusion of control fosters complacency. As long as systems function, their fragility remains invisible. But history shows that such confidence is often misplaced. When disruption occurs, the consequences are swift and far-reaching. The collapse of complex systems tends to cascade, overwhelming the structures designed to contain it. Ancient societies learned this lesson through experience. Their responses varied. Some adapted, others vanished. Those that endured did so by rethinking their relationship with the natural world. They recognized that sustainability was not a constraint, but a necessity. This understanding is echoed in the remnants of their cultures. The emphasis on balance, moderation, and respect for natural cycles appears repeatedly in ancient teachings. These principles were not philosophical abstractions, but practical strategies for survival. Modern civilization, however, often prioritizes growth over stability. Economic systems reward expansion without regard for long-term consequences. Technological progress is celebrated without equal consideration of its impact. This imbalance mirrors the conditions that led to previous collapses. Yet there is a crucial difference between the past and the present. Today, humanity possesses unprecedented access to information. The patterns of history are visible, documented, and analyzable. The knowledge needed to avoid repeating past mistakes exists. It simply requires the will to act upon it. This moment represents a crossroads. One path continues the trajectory of unchecked growth, leading toward environmental degradation and societal strain. The other embraces a recalibration of values, emphasizing sustainability, resilience, and cooperation. The choice between them will shape the future of civilization. The lessons of the past are not warnings of inevitable doom, but invitations to change course. They reveal that survival is not guaranteed by power or technology alone, but by wisdom and adaptability. Societies that recognize their limits and adjust accordingly stand the greatest chance of enduring. The ruins left behind by previous civilizations are not symbols of failure, but guides for the future. They remind us that progress without foresight leads to collapse, while humility and adaptability foster longevity. By studying these remnants, humanity gains the opportunity to avoid repeating the same mistakes. As the world faces unprecedented challenges, the relevance of these lessons becomes increasingly clear. Climate instability, resource scarcity, and social fragmentation echo the conditions that preceded past collapses. The difference now lies in awareness. For the first time, humanity can see the pattern and choose a different path. The responsibility lies with the present generation. The knowledge accumulated over millennia offers guidance, but action determines outcome. The question is not whether collapse is possible, but whether it is inevitable. In acknowledging the lessons of history, humanity stands at the threshold of a new chapter. The future remains unwritten, shaped by the choices made today. Whether this era becomes another cautionary tale or a turning point depends on the willingness to learn from the past and act with foresight. The cycle continues, but it does not have to repeat. Understanding, humility, and respect for the forces that govern existence offer a path forward. The echoes of ancient civilizations call not for reverence, but for responsibility. In listening to them, humanity may yet find the wisdom needed to endure. As the long arc of human history approaches its present moment, the accumulated weight of forgotten ages presses against the present with quiet urgency. The story that emerges is no longer simply one of rise and fall, but of choice. An ongoing negotiation between awareness and denial. Humanity now stands at a rare convergence point, one where knowledge of the past and the capacity to shape the future exist simultaneously. This moment is not unprecedented, but it is uniquely visible. Across millennia, civilizations have faced similar thresholds. Each time, the signs were present. Environmental instability, social fragmentation, accelerating technological change, and a growing disconnect between human activity and the natural systems that sustain life. What differed was not the challenge itself, but the response. Some societies adapted, restructured, and endured. Others ignored the warnings until collapse became unavoidable. The difference lay in awareness. Those who recognized patterns, who understood that growth without balance leads to ruin, were able to navigate periods of upheaval. Those who mistook dominance for permanence were swept aside by forces they believed they had mastered. The lesson is not subtle, yet it is repeatedly forgotten. In the modern world, humanity has reached a point of unprecedented capability. Our tools extend beyond physical strength into realms once considered unimaginable. We can alter genomes, reshape landscapes, and peer into the deepest corners of the universe. Yet with this power comes an equally unprecedented responsibility. The systems we have built are interdependent on a global scale, leaving little room for error. This interconnectedness mirrors the ancient networks that once linked civilizations across continents. But while ancient societies were limited by geography and communication, modern humanity operates within a single, tightly woven system. A disruption in one region reverberates across the planet. The margin for error has narrowed. What distinguishes the present era is not just technological advancement, but the accumulation of historical awareness. For the first time, humanity can observe the full arc of its own development. The patterns of rise and collapse are no longer speculative. They are documented, analyzed, and understood. This knowledge carries both a burden and an opportunity. The burden lies in recognizing that many of the conditions that preceded previous collapses are present once again. Environmental strain, economic disparity, social fragmentation, and unchecked exploitation mirror the final stages of earlier civilizations. The opportunity lies in the ability to act differently, to interrupt the cycle rather than repeat it. Ancient societies lacked the means to see beyond their immediate horizons. Their understanding was bounded by limited information and localized experience. Modern humanity, by contrast, possesses a global perspective. The challenge is not acquiring knowledge, but applying it wisely. Throughout history, moments of transformation have required a shift in collective consciousness. Survival depended not on strength alone, but on the willingness to adapt values, priorities, and behaviors. Civilizations that succeeded were those that redefined progress, moving away from short-term gain toward long-term stability. Today, such a shift demands re-examining fundamental assumptions about growth, consumption, and success. It requires acknowledging that endless expansion on a finite planet is unsustainable. It calls for redefining prosperity not as accumulation, but as resilience and balance. The echoes of past civilizations serve as both warning and guidance. Their failures reveal the consequences of ignoring ecological and social limits. Their achievements demonstrate the potential of cooperation, ingenuity, and respect for natural systems. Together, they form a blueprint, not for replicating the past, but for learning from it. Humanity now stands at a threshold where knowledge and choice intersect. The tools exist to mitigate environmental degradation, to build equitable societies, and to preserve the planet for future generations. What remains uncertain is whether the collective will exists to use those tools wisely. The future will not be determined by fate or inevitability, but by decisions made in the present. Each generation inherits the consequences of those before it and shapes the conditions for those yet to come. This chain of responsibility defines the human story. As the final chapter of this cycle unfolds, The echoes of ancient voices grow louder. They speak not in words, but in patterns, patterns of collapse and renewal, of loss and rebirth. To listen is to understand that history is not a straight line, but a spiral, offering repeated chances for growth. The challenge before humanity is to recognize the moment it inhabits, to see beyond immediate concerns and grasp the broader arc of existence, to choose foresight over convenience, cooperation over division, and wisdom over complacency. The legacy of countless civilizations rests not in their monuments, but in the lessons they leave behind. Their stories remind us that survival is not guaranteed by power or knowledge alone, but by the capacity to learn, adapt, and evolve. As the world stands on the threshold of profound change, the question is no longer whether collapse is possible, but whether transformation is possible. The answer lies in the choices made today, informed by the echoes of the past and guided by a vision for a sustainable future. The cycle has turned many times before. Whether it turns again toward renewal or ruin depends on humanity's willingness to listen, learn, and act. The past has spoken. The future now waits.